All right, Alexander, let's do an update as to what is going on. In Ukraine this morning, we had the Duran drones. They hit various cities. Kiev was the city that they did a lot of damage in. Obviously, Ukraine has no answer for this missile drone attack that Russia is putting forth every week or every other week. We have Putin and Shoigu in Minsk, in Belarus. They actually touched down just a couple of hours ago. A lot of talk as to what's going on there. You did a show yesterday. You talked about Marinka and the Russians. It is confirmed now that the Russians do have control of Marinka. They're closing in on Bakhmut every day. They're getting closer
Yeah.
and closer to closing in on Bakhmut as well. Though it looks like Ukraine is doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on Bakhmut. I say this every time we talk about Bakhmut. If it's not that significant of a city like the collective West mainstream media tells us, then why is the Ukraine military doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down on this insignificant city? Marinka is actually important, though, because as you noted yesterday, Alexander, Marinka is one of the cities one of the very fortified villages, you could say, that has been used to strike at Donetsk city. And so after Marinka, what is left is Avdiivka. And then it looks like, for the most part, the shelling towards Donetsk will
Yeah.
have abated.
Exactly.
That's what it looks like. So
Yeah.
I think that's everything that
It
that
is.
is going on. I don't know. You want to
It,
start with on the
no,
ground update and then go to
I'm going
Minsk,
to
or
I'm going to be very brief on
Minsk
the
first?
underground update because I think you've covered it all. But you're absolutely right. Now, I mean, they're always saying at the moment the media in the West is saying the U.S. government saying that we have a kind of operational pause in the war. Well, if you're fighting in Donbass, if you're a Ukrainian soldier in a place like Marinka or Bakhmut, you don't see much sign of a pause there. It may not be dramatic rapid movements, but they this grinding offensive continues. Ukraine continues to throw people into this awful meat grinder in Bakhmut. Even the Ukrainians are now referring to Bakhmut as a meat grinder, and at the same time, they're losing these other places. They're losing Marinka. They've lost another place called Yakov. I probably get the name wrong, Yakovinka or whatever it is, Vodianoye. They've lost that as well. Gradually, step by step, the Russians are breaking Ukrainian resistance in Donbass. It's a slow battle, but it's been ongoing for months, and the Russians are making progress all the time. Now, we always get people coming along saying to us, well, look, it's, the fact that the Russians are so slow must mean that the Ukrainians are doing things well. If the Ukrainians are suffering enormous losses by holding on to every millimeter of ground in the way that they are doing, then they are not doing well, and that they're buying these extra days and weeks and months at the enormous price of their own soldiers and their own army. And we've now started to read all kinds of reports. Daily Telegraph talks about the Ukrainian army being tired. I saw somewhere else how the Ukrainian army is exhausted, is running out of equipment. Even, Zaluzhny, the commander of it, said as much to The Economist. We talked about that. So this is what is actually happening on the battlefields. And Alex said that the Ukrainians don't have a response to the Russian missile and drone attacks. Well, they do. They tell fables. They say that they've shot down most of these missiles, even as we see the enormous damage these missiles and these drones do. And they repeat constantly this mantra that the Russians are going to run out of missiles. So I think it was this morning, the day we're making this video, that Danilov, who is the secretary of Ukraine's Security Council, says that they've only got missiles left for 4 more strikes. 4, which is exactly what he said, by the way, a month ago. So I think that's all I'm going to say about the battlefields. Alex summed it all up, but that's where we are. The big news over the last couple of days is that we've had an extraordinarily important sequence of meetings. Now, the first one was on Thursday when Putin met with the Security Council, which is Russia's top policy-making body. And we don't know what happened then. That's a regular meeting, but he met on Thursday at the Security Council. On Friday, he went to the so-called Joint Staff Headquarters of the Russian military that is engaged in fighting in Ukraine. And he was briefed by Surovikin and all his staff. Shoigu, the defense minister, was there. Gerasimov, the chief of the general staff, was there. Meeting went on for a whole day. That was a huge set of meetings, and we have to assume that the military leaders were all briefing Putin as to what exactly was going on and what they were going to do, what their battle plans were. And apparently he met with them individually afterwards. He met with all the key military commanders individually after the general meeting, and then there was a summary meeting afterwards. And now, after that meeting, we learn that he's come to Minsk. He's going to meet Lukashenko. Shoigu, the defense minister, is with him. Lavrov arrived just before Putin came. So this is a big meeting bringing together the entire Russian military and political leadership, its key leaders, Putin, Shoigu, and Lavrov, with Lukashenko and his top staff. And then after that meeting, when Putin comes back to Moscow, there's said to be another big meeting in the works. This is the military collegium of the defense ministry that brings together not just the military leaders who are involved in the war in Ukraine, it brings together the entire Russian military establishment as well. So it's a whole series of important meetings that Putin is now having with all of the key people involved in the conflict, not just in Ukraine, but in the conflict, if you like, with the West. The military people in Russia, and now also the military and political leaders in Belarus. So everything now points to something very big indeed, some kind of big offensive being on the way, being planned. And we can't say when, we can't say how. We're not going to say whether it's going to go for Kiev or Zaporozhye or Odessa or the Dnieper River or whatever it is, but clearly all the pieces are now being put into place and all the plans are being perfected.
Yeah, this follows Zelensky's interview with The Economist, where he was 100% convinced that the Russia is going to make a move towards Kiev via
Yeah.
Belarus. That's one of the thoughts, one of the ideas that's very popular right now, is that Russia is preparing something via Belarus. The other line of thinking is that the troops in Belarus, everything that's going on in Belarus, acts as in one instance as a kind of feint, a kind of fake to keep the military in Ukraine on their toes, so that they always have to consider this force right above them, though nothing may happen there. But it also acts as a deterrent to NATO and to the West, so that they don't make any kind of interesting moves towards either Belarus or even towards the other rumor, which is the other thinking, which is making a move towards Lviv and towards the west of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So that force acts as a kind of deterrent / feint in a way. I mean, it serves multiple purposes.
Yes.
So there's some people that say this is going to be activated and it's going to strike down towards Kiev, and there's other theories which say no, that force is there to balance things out and to keep everybody in check and to keep everybody on their toes. We don't know.
No.
We don't know what's going on. But obviously all these meetings and all these people, traveling to Belarus, something big is happening. I mean,
absolutely.
That's clear now.
Absolutely. And it, by the way, bears out exactly the point that you made on a video, which we did a short time ago, when, Putin postponed his press conference and his address to the Federal Assembly. He said, I remember you saying, people who are saying this is a sign, this is a sign, a good sign, because it shows how, the situation in Moscow is getting fragile. It's actually a bad sign. It shows that something big is on the way. And here you see, I think, confirmation of this. Something very big is on the way. Now, I don't know what it is, and you described this possibility about a move to Kiev. It's clear that Zelensky is terrified of this. This is Zelensky's fear. He's got to protect Kiev. Zelensky said something I thought absolutely astonishing today, by the way. He said, no, we're not going to evacuate people from Kiev, even though they're without water or heating and all those things, even though they're going through the most terrible privations, because if we take away the civilian population from Kiev, that makes it easier for the Russians to occupy Kiev. So on the one hand, he's admitting that he's using the civilian population of Kiev as a kind of shield, which is a rather disturbing thought in itself. But it also shows that he's worried about Kiev too. So regardless of whether the Russians are planning an attack on Kiev, all these moves, all these maneuvers, all this appearance of troops there, it's managed to convince the Ukrainians of that. And it's already pinning large numbers of Ukrainian troops along the border with Belarus, preparing for this Russian advance on Kiev. Now, it may be that that's what the Russians are planning, or it may not. We simply don't know. I personally going to say a few things. I think it's most unlikely that Putin and Shoigu and Lavrov would be coming to Kiev, to Minsk, and having talks with Lukashenko if Belarus was not going to be involved in some way. So I think probably something of that nature has been discussed. But I think rather than an attempt to capture Kiev itself, which would be very difficult, I think it's more likely a pinning operation. Again, in other words, keeping Ukrainian troops, holding them in the north, forcing Ukraine to divert troops from other fronts to try to defend Kiev, whilst Surovikin and his army in Donbass continue their forward advance to the Dnieper River. So I think if I was to make a guess, I'm not a military strategist, I think that's the most likely explanation of what we're seeing. But regardless of what it is, regardless of what the Russians plan, something big is on the way. Of that, there is no doubt at all.
Yeah, and you could also make the argument that Putin, Lavrov, and Shoigu are going to Belarus in order to completely fake out the collective West and Zelensky.
Yeah.
Maybe nothing is really on a military strategic level is being planned out. They're just kind of doing this on the back of that interview with The Economist and all the talk in Kiev, because all the talk in Kiev is about Kiev's about Kiev. In the Zelensky regime, it's all about Kiev. That's all they're talking about. When is Russia going to take Kiev? So maybe they're just kind of playing into the fears of the Zelensky regime and of the West. Who knows? That could be a possibility. But
it's possible.
I think it's something along. Yeah, it's possible.
It's possible.
I mean, you know what it shows? It shows that Russia's in complete control of what's going on. That's what it shows me.
Exactly.
They're in complete control of everything that is going on right now.
Yes.
Not only on the battlefield, but also the optics of everything, and the sense and anxiety and fears and everything around the battlefield. The Russians are completely in control of it. It's that cat playing with the mouse. That's the kind of sense that I'm getting. The Russians now are toying with Zelensky.
Absolutely. I think that's entirely correct, and I think you've got it exactly correct. I think that's exactly what they're doing. It also contrasts. It shows you the contrast between the two leaders. I mean, Putin having this sequence of meetings, step by step. He's preparing his moves. Zelensky telling us, he says he comes up with all sorts of extraordinary things. He says one of the things he said today apparently was that the only guarantee that he's prepared to give is that Putin's life will be spared when presumably Ukraine takes Moscow. So it gives you the sense of the difference between the two men as well. But you're absolutely right. The Russians hold the initiative. They are the ones who are going to make all the big decisions over the next few weeks, over the next few days, and they're keeping us all guessing. They're keeping the Ukrainians guessing. They're making Zelensky increasingly despondent. That was what that Economist article suggested to me, and he's going to be even more despondent now when he sees Minsk hosting Putin, Shoigu, and Lavrov.
Yeah, I think Zelensky is kind of
No.
becoming mad.
Yes.
I mean, crazy, I
Yes.
think.
Yes.
I don't know. I saw the interview that he gave with the French TV channel, and I think he's losing his mind.
Yes.
I really do. He's challenging Putin to a one-on-one fight. He's talking about keeping people in Kiev and using them as shields. He
That's
says
right.
that Ukrainians, in their mind, in their heads, they're ready to take over, to reconquer Crimea in their heads. I think he is losing his mind. On the one hand, he has Putin and the Russian military keeping him guessing, and he has no idea. He's probably thinking, when are the Russians going to surround my palace in Kiev? He's probably got that on his mind. When are they going to surround my palace? On the other hand, he's got the West far right Azov guys there. He's got the neocons in the State Department, and then he's got Zelensky, a person that he does not get along with. There are more rumors coming out about how the two men despise each other.
Yes.
And he's probably thinking this guy Zelensky is going to he's going to be deposing me. So I think Zelensky is kind of losing his mind.
Yes.
And we're starting to see that. You can see in that interview.
Yes.
He's going mad.
Well, indeed,
he really
absolutely.
is.
I mean, I'm glad you brought up the Crimean thing, because the Crimean thing I thought was absolutely bizarre. We've already started the the campaign to retake Crimea, and it's not something we planned. It's not something we're doing. We're psychologically, mentally preparing for it. As you said, it was very weird. It was very, very strange. And what the interviewer made of it all, I really can't imagine. And what the Western public, the French public made of it all, again, I can't imagine. But as I said, it did suggest a leader who is losing touch with reality. And can I just say, it's interesting what you said about, him becoming, going mad, if you like, because that is exactly what the Americans and the South Vietnamese concluded about President Diem of South Vietnam before they finally moved to overthrow him. They decided in his case that Diem was becoming a liability, a massive liability, because he was becoming so bizarre and so eccentric and so many of the things he was doing. And eventually they backed the military to remove Diem. I've mentioned this many times. And you could say that, the very high profile that Zelensky is being given, it suggests that some people in Washington are looking at these interviews Zelensky's giving, having to work with Zelensky all the time, having to deal with Zelensky when he tells them that a S-300 missile Ukraine has launched is really a Russian cruise missile and things of this kind. Well, I think they must be getting increasingly exasperated. And I would not be surprised if after interviews like that, they're starting to say enough's enough. We've got to find a way to get someone else. And Zelensky is maybe the man.
Yeah, I agree. And then he wanted to speak at the World Cup, and they denied him, and he went crazy.
Absolutely, very angry about
Yeah.
that too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's wrap it up with
Yeah.
an analysis as to how things are shaping up for Ukraine. The economy is a mess. The European Union is going to give an 18 billion euro loan. They're going to take out a loan and then loan it to Ukraine, and that's not enough.
No.
The United States is saying you need to give more. The damage to the electric infrastructure in Ukraine is really at a tipping point. I mean, I think 2 or 3 more strikes of the nature of what we got last week, and we could be looking at 75%. I don't know. I mean, I'm hearing 50% of the grid is
down.
just knocked out now.
Yeah.
It's down. So 3, 4, 5 more weeks of this, and it could be at at a terrible level. Refugee crisis, a lot of talk about evacuating Kiev, evacuating many cities. And the weather conditions are pointing to the ground hardening, and a lot of military analysts are saying that's when the Russians are going to make their move. The mobilization, the partial mobilization, all those troops are for the most part finishing up or already trained up. So I imagine they've got to be moving to a position where they're ready.
Yeah.
It's everything is pointing to a very, very bad 2023 for Zelensky, and I mean, I don't know. How do you see? I mean, I'm just looking at all the signs.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, it doesn't.
And real quick, Alexander, real quick, I also want to ask you, in your analysis, there are also reports that the Russians are not only going after the energy grid, but they've also identified some of the S-300 air defense installations as well.
Yes.
And they're taking those out as well. I can't confirm this, but this is what I've read as well. So that's also interesting.
I saw those reports as well. And I also got, by the way, a really, really sad email from someone in Odessa this morning who said that he's 16 hours a day without power in Odessa. So, and this has been going on now for 2 weeks with no end in sight. So, things are not looking good anywhere in Ukraine. And, as you correctly said, Zelensky's just losing his wits in the face of it. He's retreating into megalomania. And some elements of paranoia as well, paranoid about Zelensky, perhaps with very good reason. But I agree. I mean, everything looks like the fact that the Russians are now going in for the kill. Now, it's probably not going to be a quick kill, given the way things are, but that is how it's looking. And you talked about the Americans saying $18 billion for Ukraine is not enough. The EU had a huge battle with itself to get this $18 billion agreed. The Americans are now saying that they've got to provide that Ukraine needs to be given $2 billion more a month. That's another $24 billion. And I've heard some say actually it needs to be $8 billion a month. We're looking at $100 billion. I'm talking about dollars, not euros, by the way, of aid from Europe to Ukraine over the course of 2023. And that's only the estimate now. I mean, it's an estimate that's going to go up and up. And of course, we're seeing growing problems in the European economy. All that talk about how, the energy problems have been fixed. Articles now appearing in Bloomberg and other places saying, well, actually, that's not right at all. Things are really bad on that front. So a very bad year for Ukraine, 2023. And Zelensky has no answers. That's why he's retreating into these megalomaniac fantasies of retaking Crimea, putting Putin on trial, keeping all the people in Kiev, all of that sort of thing. So I don't know what's coming. Something big is certainly on the way, but it doesn't look good for Ukraine at all. 2023 looks like a disaster for Ukraine, and I agree with you.
Yeah. I guess the only question is, can the U.S. continue to keep Ukraine afloat? Because I think with each passing week, Europe is dropping out.
Absolutely.
I mean, Europe can't do it anymore. That's the sense that I'm getting. Even Schultz is trying to find an off-ramp. Yeah. Croatia the other day said they're not going to train. The parliament voted against training troops. You had Slovakia. The government collapsed there.
Yes.
Europe, one by one, member states in Europe, in the EU, are, they're bowing out for various reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder actually whether in the US, with the Republicans now in control of the House, whether the political battles, which are sure to intensify over the course of the next year, are going to leave much room for Ukraine. And one gets the sense the military, General Milley and people like that, also are starting to think that this is really an investment, that's absorbing far too much of everything that America has. I mean, we discussed that. We had that program with Brian Beletic and Gonzalo Lira a short time ago, but in which Brian again talked to us about how, you know, weapons are being poured into Ukraine. This voracious need Ukraine has for weapons is something that even the United States today simply can't keep up with. So 300 tanks, 700 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 howitzers, it just can't be done. Even the United States can't do it. And the administration in Washington is going to become distracted before long with its own problems, too many of its own problems, to really be able to focus too much on this.
All right. Any other final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
It's a terrible wasted year. We could have had a peace deal both before we had a peace deal. We had the Minsk agreement, which could have been implemented, and we almost had a peace deal, sorry, in March. And the British and the Americans, the administration and Boris Johnson sabotaged it, and now we see where we are. So an absolute disaster, with Zelensky reduced to saying that he needs to keep the people in Kiev, basically to act as a shield for himself and to prevent Kiev becoming occupied by the Russians. When a leader talks in that kind of desperate way, well then it's time's up, really.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a Shakespeare play which encapsulates what Zelensky is going through, but I just can't.
Goodness.
I don't know. Do
No,
you?
nor can
Can you
I.
think
Nor can I.
of a
And that's a
play
good
or a
point.
novel or
Yeah,
that
yeah.
encapsulates the king going mad?
Oh well, look at the king going
This
mad.
type of thing.
King Lear, I suppose, is the case of the king going mad, but that's a rather different circumstances to this one. I can't think of. I simply can't think of a situation that parallels this one too exactly. As I said, President Diem in Vietnam, the leader of Germany in the last months of the war, was also saying some rather extraordinary things. But I mean, it has some parallels. By the way, the leader of Germany, was also talking about the importance of keeping civilian populations in cities to act as shields, which is why nobody was evacuated. There was no planned evacuation from Berlin, for example.
Okay, the Duran.locals.com. We are also on Rockfin as well. And go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.